Welcome back to Schmattz Outdoors, everyone. This is going to be the last video in my bear hunt series here. I appreciate everyone following along the preseason baiting, the actual hunt videos. I do want to apologize that the hunt video, the first one, was basically me just talking, giving you a recap of what happened. And the second one probably ended up being a little chaotic, just the way the footage I had. I apologize for that. I wish it was a little bit better put together, but I only had so much footage. I'd only taken so much the day of. I was planning on filming like tracking, but there really wasn't much to film, and it's sort of a dangerous situation once you wound a bear. Not that I wounded it, but once you have a wounded bear in the woods, going in and trying to film with one hand, I had my bow in one hand and my pistol in my other hand while I was looking for my bear, and there really wasn't much blood to find. So, and then I also meant to do a little bit of filming of the actual like skinning, butchering, and that type of stuff. I didn't film only out of respect for the couple that allowed me to use their shed in order to hang my bear, and that type of stuff. I don't think they were comfortable with me filming there, and they didn't really want to be on camera. So when it comes down to me getting footage for you guys, or me just physically taking care of my animal, trying to do the best I can to get it skinned that night and then butchered the next morning, that was more important than trying to get footage for you guys. So again, I have some thoughts. I have my laptop set next to me, so I've kind of tried to keep track of a few things. We're going to go through the hunt itself, what the bear ended up being, because I don't think I really showed that well on camera, and then some lessons. So that's what my channel is supposed to be geared towards here. So there's a few lessons to be learned this time. This is a little bit of recap here. So this is the third time I've bear hunted in Minnesota. I bear hunted 10 years ago, and I bear hunted 6 years ago. 10 years ago, I hunted like 12 days and never seen a bear. The last time I hunted about, I think it was close to 10 days before I finally seen the first bear, and it wasn't that big a bear, and I was able to harvest that with my bow and arrow as well. So basically I'd only in, I don't know, 20 some days of hunting seen one bear. This time, the first time I was sort of on some friends guided me, let's put it that way. It wasn't a guided hunt, but they give me some pointers, help me bait and that type of stuff. The last time it was a complete do-it-yourself type hunt. I found my own bait locations and did all my own baiting and harvested my bear. This time was 100% that as well. So I pre-scouted in July. I went up, I spent basically a weekend, 2 days, walking around the woods up there. I had used Onyx, and I had e-scouted a few spots that I wanted to walk into, and I'm glad I went up there because there was big chunks of land up there of the public land that had been logged between when I was up there 6 years ago and this year. So those areas I think are probably okay for bear. The new growth is probably excellent bear habitat, but the trouble is you can't hang there's no trees to hang a stand or anything on. So I would say probably 25% of the spots I had earmarked had been logged in that time frame, including one of my baits that I thought about rebaiting or using again this time. I don't know if they actually logged exactly to where my tree was at that at my stand in, but if they didn't, they were, within 50 yards of getting to the tree I had my stand in the last time. So the problem with that is not that I couldn't, if my tree was still there, I could have baited, but getting to that tree through that new growth would have been a nightmare. So yeah, I'm glad I went up in July and did pre-scouting. Again, you guys watched, I did all my own baiting. I mixed my own bait. I did all that. And then I did all my hunting. I got my bear out of the woods. The only thing I really had help with is just that a couple was nice enough to let me use their shed again to hang my bear. skin it, let it hang overnight, and butcher it. And they were more than happy to help. They're well versed in the bear hunting world up there. They don't do a lot of bear hunting themselves. I think they've only ever killed one bear for each one of them. But they like just to see bears. You know, they're very interested in them. They kind of enjoy the process of bear hunting, so the baiting and everything else. So, but yeah, so I didn't have any help from them other than just them letting me use their shed, and then a little bit of help, you know, butchering it, I guess. More so just a second set of hands to help, you know, hold bags open, you know, hold the carcass from spinning and that type of stuff while I was trying to break it down. So we're gonna go right into the hunt. So I hunted day 1 on bait 2 because it had gotten hit the day before, and bait 1 had not been hit. It only, you know, the whole time I'd been baiting that I was up there from Friday until Monday when I could start hunting, it had not gotten hit. So it just, I knew the bears would eventually find it, but I didn't want to go sit there with the idea that no bear had found it yet. Bait 2 had gotten hit on Sunday, so I thought, well, Monday, it was set up for that wind. So I went in there and I sat there, but it didn't get hit from Sunday until Monday. The bait was still there. So something hit it Sunday, but they didn't hit it Monday. I kind of felt like I hung in there and wasted my time. But again, at least I knew there was a bear there at some point. You know, yeah, have hope that something's going to come in while you're sitting there, and nothing ever ended up coming in. We had a storm come through Monday night. Wind direction changed from a southerly winds to northwest winds. So that means bait number 3, that was the only bait I had set up for a northwest wind. And it was kind of lucky enough, the bait that had been getting hit the most, again, from the last weekend of pre-baiting through the beginning of the hunt, that one had basically been getting hit every day except for the first day it didn't get hit. And then from then it was getting hit every day, and they were cleaning me out. So they were eating 4 gallons of bait a day. And again, I was going kind of every other day, 4 and 2, but they were cleaning me out every night or every day. By the time I got in there, it was cleaned out. So worked out well that the wind changed and allowed me to hunt the bait that was getting hit the most, to be honest with you. And I would have had a couple days of hunting that the wind would have been right for that bait. So while I was in there, so day 2, I walked in and I baited bait 3, walked all the way back out, changed my clothes and everything into my hunting gear because I had gotten sweated up baiting bait 1, and then walking in and baiting bait 2, everything was wet because we got rain overnight. So it was actually kind of nice to walk in, you knock all the water off the bushes when you walk by, all that stuff. So I was pretty wet coming back out. And then it was nice to put on my hunting clothes, and when I walked in, I actually stayed pretty dry all the way in there. So that worked out well. It was windy. It was blowing, I think, like 15 to 20 according to my weather app, and gusting over 30, and I could definitely tell that when I was in the tree. One thing that sort of sped up me taking the shot on the bear that I did, and we're going to get into that here in a second, is when the wind would gust, it was blowing like almost pretty much in my face from the bait to me. So you're the bait blowing right in my face, and I have a piece of dental floss on my bow that's my wind checker. You know, it blows around real easy, like 6 inches long, tied to the upper limb. And the wind would blow, it would blow towards me, and as soon as the wind would stop gusting, it would actually suck back towards my bait. So it was like 10 seconds of wind blowing in my face and 5 seconds of it almost sucking back the other way. And it just kept doing that from 2 o'clock when I first got in there, maybe 2:15 at the latest. I was hanging in my stand. I had nothing else going on. I had nothing to lose to go sit there, and I had no pictures to tell me when the bears were coming. So I'm like, I could have easily been there right away in the morning. I just did not want to hang there all day. So I thought, well, I ate lunch and I kind of got ready. Then I went and did my baiting. And when I showed up to my bait, it ended up being about 2 o'clock. And that's what I had been doing all along. So I wanted to keep that consistency of baiting about the same time every day. Again, to kind of train the bears to when the fresh bait is there. So from 2 o'clock until 4 o'clock, it just kept gusting back and forth. And I'm not even kidding. I thought, you know, 10 times probably, like, God, I should get out of here, just because the way the wind was swirling in there. I was so afraid that, like, not even that the bear would even get into the bait, that they would smell me out in the woods before they ever got close enough for me to see them. You know, and that's what I didn't want to blow up my bait on the first day. And I ended up, I mean, I was having that thought go through my head multiple times, and it happened that that bear showed up. So, yeah, we'll get more into the bear in a second. So, you know what, we'll get into the bear right now. So the bear, when I first saw it in there, I tried to video it a little bit, but the woods is so thick in that area, which I think is prime reason why the bears are there. So bait number 2 was kind of in a more open area. I mean, I could see probably 50 to 100 yards, depending on the direction, once I was up in my tree. You know, so I could have definitely seen the bear coming from a long ways off. And I just kind of wonder if that also makes the bear a little uneasy. Bait number 1 and bait number 3, which had more bears on there and were getting hit more consistently, it was very thick in there. Bait 1 a little bit less so where my stand was. It was kind of clear and open to the north of my stand, but south of my bait and east of my bait, which is where I expected the bears to come from, it was super, super thick in there. High stem counts, very brushy, you know, a lot of understory in there. And where bait 3, it was the same way. Like, a lot of the brush was only 10 feet high in there. And I think it just plays very well into giving the bears the security they need to feel comfortable coming in, especially in the daylight. And that's very important when you're hunting them. So when the bear finally come in, I was hanging from my tree saddle. So I'm hunting out of a saddle, bow hunting. I actually had relaxed down and I had my knees rested up against my tree in front of me, you know, just to kind of take a little pressure off my legs and relax a little bit. I've been standing there most of 2 hours already, and I'm guessing maybe 5 minutes I was kind of had my knees pushed up against a tree, just kind of relaxing, and I just happened to glance off to the side of my bait a little bit, and all I could see was the head and the ears, you know, the head essentially. And the ears looked very small, and I'm like, you know, and it was staring right at me already. And I hadn't been really moving all that much, so I don't know if it winded me or what, but it definitely knew I was hanging there. One thing I want to make a point of is I wasn't very high. My feet were only like 10 feet off the ground because the mid-story brush was so canopied over right there that if I'd have went any higher, now I'd have literally had to like cut, you know, a huge swath of the canopy out of off of some of those trees in order to so I could see my bait. And I didn't want to do that. I was up probably about as high as I could have got, so that canopy was like here, my arrow flew just underneath it, you know, within a foot of the canopy to get to my bear. The camera angle that you guys had was directly in line with my tree. So the tree was here. I had my camera basically mounted on the front side of the tree aiming at my bait. I'm hanging off of the left side of the tree as you guys were looking at watching the video of me harvesting the bear, the arrow hitting the bear hit on my bait and me shooting it. I was off to the left, basically like this much, so the camera would have been like, you know, an arm length away, so 2.5 feet probably. So I'm hanging off to the side. So my perspective and the camera's perspective are a little bit different. So in the camera, there's a few like little sticks in front of the camera. Those were all well out of my line of sight when I was, you know, hunting, or while I was shooting. When the bear first walked out and kind of poked his head, like, you know, looking at me when it first comes into kind of camera view there. On the camera, you can see like most of the front leg and the shoulders and the neck and everything. All I could see was the head. So it peeked out just enough so it could look at me. When I first seen it, I thought, man, the ears are kind of small on that bear. It looks like a small bear. But as soon as it's kind of stepped out in the open and I seen like the big fat belly that was only like 6 inches off the ground, I'm like, that is a nice sized bear. We're going to try and harvest that bear. So, and you could tell like it didn't come right into my bait. It was definitely nervous come in there because it walked out kind of behind my bait out on one of the other trails coming in. And then, you know, went 15 feet past my bait and then turned around, and it definitely wanted to eat in there. And it, luckily enough, it come back. So we'll get into the shot angle here, and then we're going to talk more about the bear itself. So I've had a few comments telling me that that was probably, they think it was an unethical shot. There's a few reasons why I don't think that's the case. So This one kind of annoys me, quite frankly. I was very comfortable with that shot. When it first come in, I almost shot it when it first come back to my bait. And I'm like, oh, we'll give it a little bit to see if it'll turn more broadside. In the footage, you could see the wind blowing the bushes right in front of me. You could see how gusty it was in there. You know, and like I was playing, it was gusting back and forth. And I was so worried that it was going to catch my wind. So as soon as the bear comes into the view of the camera, I was already at full draw. It walked out beyond my bait, come back, and when it first come into the bait, it was basically facing head on, and I ended up letting down. I figured I was at full draw well over a minute. And I'm like, all right, we're gonna let down. As soon as it kind of put its head down to feed, I let down. And then as I was sitting there, I'm like, you know, if it turns and gives me even a nice quartering two shot, we're gonna shoot exactly what I did. With that, I have very high confidence level in the equipment I'm shooting. If you were shooting a 400 grain arrow with a flapper, as Ranch Fairy calls them, an expandable broadhead, something like that, I would never take the shot I did on that bear. Never. If you're shooting expandable broadheads, that would not be a good shot on a bear, on any animal. But that's not what I'm shooting. My arrows are roughly 625 grains. My FOC is about 20%, maybe even just a tick higher than that. And I'm shooting a 200 grain cutthroat single bevel broadhead, just a flat broadhead with no bleeders on there. I have all the confidence in the world that even if I'd have hit the leg bone or anything like that, it would have blown right through the leg bone. It broke one rib on the way in. I mean, yeah, so the heavy arrow, you could say what you want about that. I don't really care your comments. I don't need to, you can blow up my comments with arrow talk if you want to, but flat out, I don't really care. I shot a lot of animals with 400 grain arrows and expandable broadheads, and I've switched back. I've had some bad instances with those broadheads not working, or that arrow setup and broadhead setup not working the way I expected them to. Still was able to harvest the animals, but you know, in less than ideal situations. In this case, my arrow blew right through that bear. You can't see it very well on the camera, but if you watch when that bear twirls, the arrow actually is sticking out, basically the entire arrow minus the fletching. So I think it went through, I figured over 3 foot of bear. So the arrow hit right in the meat of the front shoulder, or front leg. It actually went through a little bit of the meat into the cavity, one lung. It endoed the heart. Here's a picture of that. You could see it went in right by the ventricles and come out the point of the heart. Then it angled, caught the back of the other lung, or actually from the middle of that lung all the way through the diaphragm, and it come out like 4 inches behind the last rib. At that angle, I figured that arrow went 3 feet plus through that bear and was still sticking out most of the arrow except for the fletchings. When that bear twirled, real time, I see my arrow sticking out, you know, roughly that far. When it twirls, it actually hits one of the little bushes that the bear is standing by. If you watch real close and replay it, you can see it kind of tick the little tree. I've tried to do slow motion video on it, and the video did not capture it well enough to actually like stop the frame and point it to it that the arrow's there. When the bear turned and basically started to run, it run like 5 feet and it bulldozed a little bush. Right there's where my arrow was laying. I suspect, I can't prove this, I have no way of knowing this, but after the fact, watching the footage myself, I suspect my arrow actually hit the ground on the other side. I have nothing really to prove that. The broadhead really didn't have any dirt stuck to it or anything like that, but at the angle I shot, angling down, going through that much bear, and as low as it come out, you know, not mid-body, it was down closer to the bottom of the belly when it come out. I suspect it actually hit the ground on the other side. So you guys could say that's an unethical shot. If that bear was quartering away from me, I would have basically tried to take the shot in the reverse angle. I would have shot it probably first rib or the back rib and angle it right up through there and wanting it to come out in front of the shoulder. So you guys could say what you want about the shot. I'm more than happy. I'm more than comfortable taking that shot. I would probably take the same shot on a whitetail, given this opportunity. Yes, I prefer a broadside shot. On a bear, you actually want like a quartering away shot because the leg is so, their leg is big and their heart and lungs are shifted kind of up a little bit even farther forward than a deer. So you actually want a little more of a quartering away shot on a bear than you like a deer you would want. Broadside I would have taken a broadside shot. 6 years ago when I shot my bear, that bear was perfectly broadside. But yeah, so the shot, you can say what you want. I'm more than happy with the setup that I have. I'm more than comfortable with the arrow setup I'm shooting. My broadhead and everything, I literally could have rinsed it off, put it right back on, and I could be deer hunting with it right now. My broadhead was still razor sharp. There was a couple dings right on the very front of it, which leads me, one, that it broke a rib on the way in, and that kind of leads me that it hit the ground on the other side. But again, I got no proof. So one last thing on the hunt, and then we're going to get into kind of the details of the bear. So when I went back in the next day to pull my stand out of there, my bait had actually gotten hit a little bit. It didn't eat everything, but it ate probably half of what was left, because the bear I shot, actually, it ate probably a third of the bait I had laying there before I ended up shooting it. So, you know, it wasn't there. I think from the time it showed up on camera to the time that I shot was like something like 4 minutes, somewhere in that neighborhood. You know, the fact that it ate that much bait that quickly, you know, showed me kind of why that bear was so fat. So, all right. So let's go. We got 2 more sections here. We're going to kind of go through them fairly quickly. So my bear, it ended up being a female. So when I first found the bear and I was filming with my phone, I called it a male several times just because of the size of the bear, the blocky head, all that kind of led me to believe that it was a big male, or that it was a male. Wasn't a giant male if it was, but a male. Most likely it's an older bear. The canines were all like rounded off, both the top and bottom ones. Everything was, all the teeth were kind of wore down in there. So the dressed weight, and I'll pop a picture of it in here, we weighed it on a scale. So field dress weight, it was 218.4. Reading online some of the rough estimates, it's around like 18-ish plus, 18 to 22% is kind of the number I found that you lose when you field dress a bear. So that puts my bear between 265 and 275 live weight. So that's right there with, my goal kind of going into the hunt was 300 pounder or bust. The difference in 25 pounds, I couldn't tell you that, you know, that bear looked 300 when it walked into me. So I'm stoked with this bear, like stoked with the bear. So I actually believe it's towards the high end of that range. So I think it's probably closer to 275. Again, when the bear first walks in there, you know, its belly is only 6 inches off the ground. Like, you had a huge pot belly on there. Well, that pot belly is mostly, you know, the innards and everything else that you take out when you field dress a bear. And then when I went to gut the bear, the chest cavity, even though I had poked a hole in the diaphragm, it was full to the top of blood in there. So basically, endoing the heart, it basically drained that bear of blood. Once we hung it, it dripped a little bit, I think, just because I had a hard time picking it up to like dump out the blood when I was field dressing it, because it's 220 pounds. I got some of it out of there, but I think there was still a little in there. When we first hung it, it dripped out of the nose just a little bit. But otherwise, I think I pretty well drained that bear of blood, and that also leads me to believe that it was a little towards the higher end, because, you know, a gallon of blood is probably 8 pounds, like a gallon of milk. So I think it's a little bit towards the high end. Looking at the Minnesota DNR website, so they estimate an adult female bear should be between 150, or averages between 150 and 300 pounds. Well, mine being even 265 to 275, I'm definitely on the high end of that. So Minnesota also, you send 2 samples into the DNR so they can age the bears, they get population dynamics and everything out of that. They should send me a report back of, you know, the age of the bear and everything. I'm not going to be surprised if that bear is upwards close to 10 years old. Just with everything that I seen looking at that bear, you know, everything leads me to believe it's on the higher end of it was on the higher end of the weight class, but it leads me to believe it's going to be on the higher end of the age range as well. So I did not have any trail cam pictures of this bear. So this is on bait number 3, like 2 days during that week that I left them up there, you know, after I talked to the DNR officer. The bear had turned my camera and it was basically pointing at a tree that I had my sign on, and the bear rubbed his face on that tree. But I did not have any pictures of this bear because it's very noticeable. You know, it had the big white V on there, the big fat belly. I didn't have any bears on that bait prior to them moving my camera that looked like that. So I definitely didn't have any camera pictures of him. I estimated the day I shot my bear that it had run roughly 50 yards. Well, according to Onyx, I mapped it out at 42 yards that bear run from my bait to where I found my bear. On the next day when I went in to pull my stand out of there, more than anything, out of curiosity, I walked over there, I looked at my gut pile, I thought, well, maybe something would eat on it, and nothing had. But I went basically from there, and I drew basically a straight line in my mind, like my bait is that way, and I literally walked directly to my bait, and it was exactly 42 yards. So that is not far at all in the bear hunting world. Gun hunting, once in a while, a bear will drop in its tracks, but that actually doesn't happen all that often. You know, gun hunting deer, it happens way more often than it does for bears. And then I only have one run 40 yards, and I think that bear, you know, was expired within 20 seconds of me arrowing it, because it's not like it run in there and then stood there and bled out. It looked like it run, and it almost looked like it like slid to a stop where it was laying. So I think the heart shot, I think it basically just pumped it all out, and it was done very quickly. So after my bear did not bleed, so I didn't film any of the tracking of my bear, because there really wasn't much to film anyway. So after the arrow hit the bear whirled around and it kind of rolled sideways over a little bush there, and my arrow come out. About 10 feet behind that, about where you lose sight of the bear in the video, that's the only spot I really found any blood, and there was a little bit smeared on a couple little trees as it run by. And in the video, it looks like to me like it goes out and then it like turned almost like 90 degrees and run sideways. Well, it turns out it actually only turned just a little and run more at like probably 45 degrees from the camera view that you're looking at. So when I got in there, I kind of searched around that first blood for quite a while, and I could not find any smeared blood on any other little trees, anything like that. I ended up basically in that area, the brush is like 8 feet high, and there's leaves down to like 4 feet. So 4 feet off the ground to 8 feet, there was leaves. So what I ended up doing is just crouching down, skimming around, and then looking, and then, oh, I didn't see anything, didn't see blood, you know, didn't see my bear. So then I moved a little ways, you know, 10, 15 feet and did it again. Well, I happened to kind of look off to my side, and I seen one little spot of black, and then I kind of got a little bit close, you know, headed that way because I figured that was my bear, and sure enough it was. I got a little closer and looked again, I could see a little bigger spot, and I ended up walking up right behind that bear. So yeah, and that is very common from what from my research. That's very common in bear hunting, that they don't bleed a whole lot. They're very fat animals. So like the outside, there was no blood at all in the fur on the outside, the exit wound. On the inside, in my video, I think I showed there was just a little spot of a few drips of blood on the hair on the outside, but that was it. Even in the meat, in the leg, because it went through the meat of the leg, I lost basically nothing other than I cut a little wedge around where my arrow had went through, only because it had pulled some hair into the meat, and I didn't want that in my meat. So I didn't really end up losing hardly anything for meat on my bear, just because they're so fat, it just plugs the hole so quickly. And I think that's why the chest cavity was full of blood, because it just plugged it up. It just can't run out of there. So walking into that bait, so I keep saying that bait is about a quarter mile off the road. I actually should have looked it up and I didn't, but it's roughly that, right at 400 yards. but when I walk into that bait, I'm not walking straight into it. So there's a road here, it was 400 yards off, but basically I started over here, had to walk out at it, or I walked out at an angle and then got to kind of the trail that I was on and then walked out to my bait. So I'm walking probably an extra 75 yards, maybe even a little more, before I like turned to head out towards in there. Only because like directly from that trail to the road, it was super, super thick in there. And I just didn't want to like have to carry bait and everything else through there. There was kind of a old logging road or whatever it was that kind of went at an angle over to where I was parking. So from where I had parked at that angle out to past my bait, and just past my bait, there was actually a cross trail in there, which is where I originally had planned on putting my bait. And I decided to move it back from there, and I'm very glad I did. But my bear ended up basically right next to that cross trail. So I walked past my bait on the trail, like where the bear went by my bait originally. I basically just kept going on that trail out another like 50 yards and then walked sideways over to where my bear was. And I was within 10 feet of my bear with my game cart. All in all is 530 yards. I drug my bear out of there on my game cart. So I don't know, there's a few questions on how far it was out there, but it was a ways. So 530 yards. And part of that is from my bear, I had to walk sideways a little bit, down the trail, and then angle over to my truck back to the road. So it was fairly easy going. I had trouble on some of there was a couple bigger logs like that. I went over the first one and it actually bent the wheel on my game cart. I believe I showed that. But once I got over the first one, like I had a hard time getting it over it. So once I got to a couple of the other logs, I actually kind of stopped back just a little bit. And then I actually like diverted off my trail out into the woods a little bit. And, you know, I can wheel over brush that big or as big as my thumb, an inch around, you know, and they'll just bend over. So that's what I ended up doing. I kind of diverted and went around some of the down logs just because it was a little easier going than trying to go over those big logs with that heavy of an animal on there. I did also wedge myself in between two trees. I diverted around a stump like that, and then the axles on my game cart stick out like an inch past the wheels. And I was kind of watching, all of a sudden like, and kind of wedged myself in there. I literally was a quarter inch or maybe even less from making it between there. So I was lucky enough to kind of wiggle like that, and I got it pulled between the two trees. It just kind of scraped the bark off of the side of the trees, you know, and they were two bigger trees like that, big around. So got lucky in the one spot that I didn't have to like try and back out of there and go around. But so yeah, getting the bear out of there, it took me some time, but from the time I left my truck with my game cart, walked 530 yards out there, got the bear on my game cart, kind of strapped down just a little bit, and then wheeled it all the way out, including filming the other little bear that was up in the tree on my way out, was 35 minutes. So that was way quicker or easier than I thought it was going to be. I figured it was going to be an hour and a half project to get a bear out of the woods, you know, out of any of my baits, just the way they were set up and how far off the roads they were. So I got a few questions of what I'm going to do with the bear itself. So obviously the meat, I have already took the meat in. 2 days after I shot the bear, I had deboned everything. I kind of kept what I wanted to keep for meat, for roast, for steaks, for grinding, for some hamburger, and I took the rest into the locker plant. 5 days later, the locker actually had it done. So I've actually ate some of the sticks already. I've ate a few of the sausages already, and they are excellent. There is like no gamey taste to them at all, which a lot of people tell me, you know, is the case when you shoot bigger, older bears. I have not noticed that at all with bear meat. So when I shot my bear the last time, it was a much smaller bear. It was just a 2-year-old bear. I didn't notice it then. Like people say you got to trim all the fat off of it. I literally cooked the ribs, smoked the ribs, and left all the fat on there, and they were delicious. And that's the same experience I've had so far eating my bear meat this time. So maybe if you shot a 10-year-old boar, it might be different than a 10-year-old female, but yeah, I just have not noticed that to be the case. So for the hide and the skull, I am not going to have a rug made, but I am going to have the hide tanned. I took it to a taxidermist again, 2 days after I shot the bear, I took it to a taxidermist so they could flesh it and, you know, get it tan for me. I'm gonna have them basically act like they're gonna do a rug. So you actually split the lip, so you kind of cut the lip open so it will dry properly. You know, skin out the whole head, skin out the paws. You know, I cut the paws off basically at the ankles and left them in the hide. So the taxidermist is gonna skin all that out for me and then have it tanned. The skull, I'm gonna have it cleaned so I can have like a European mount for the skull. I think there's a rough possibility it will go Pope and Young. I need to look it up a little again, but it's like either 18 or 19 inches for Pope and Young. And I think it might be close to that. I think it's plenty wide enough, so that measurement's gonna give me help, but it might be, seems like it's a little bit stubbier face. So a male would probably have a little bit longer nose and maybe even a little wider head too, but it's gonna be close Pope and Young. I don't really care. I'll probably never actually get it scored Pope and Young. I just think it's interesting if it does. I'll measure it myself and just kind of see how close I am. But yeah, so European mount on the skull. I have the skull and the hide from the first one I shot as well. I did all the work. I tanned, you know, flesh, dried, and had the hide tan from the first one I shot 6 years ago. And I took the skull to the same taxidermist to have it cleaned. I think he's gonna do an excellent job. I just, one, don't have the time and don't have the back strength in order to want to wrestle a hide that big around and try and flesh it myself. So the reason why I'm not gonna do a rug right away is, you guys seen the giant belly on that bear? It was almost like, it wasn't, but it was almost like the bear was bloated. So it like stretched the belly out. So like the hair was very thin on the belly part of it. The chest, the neck, and everything is super plush and thick and heavy. So I think it would make a cool rug, but I think you would almost want to trim part of that belly off of there. Well, then I don't really want to do that either. So I'm just going to start with just getting it tanned, and then I can always go back and take it back over there, and he could have an actual rug made out of it. You know, put the fake head in there and then have the felt and everything put on there. So that's what I'm going to do. It's going to cost me about $120 for the skull, and he's estimating about $500 to have the hide tanned, which is very comparable. So 6 years ago, I paid about $300 just to have it tanned myself, and that was after I fleshed it and dried it, and I used salt to dry it because that's what the tannery wanted. So I, had to buy 50-pound bags of salt to salt it, and I had to do it like 3 or 4 times to get it dry. So with all that work involved and everything, $300 to tan, he's only gonna be making like $200 off of it. I think I'm coming out way ahead, honestly, in that. So, all right, now the interesting part. If you guys got any questions on my bait, the hunt itself, and what the bear was, please leave those down in the comments below. Now to the lessons I learned this time. So I don't want to bring it up, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it again, but in Minnesota state wildlife management areas, WMAs, you cannot leave trail cameras. I did not know this. 6 years ago, I may or may not had trail cameras on my baits. Nothing ever happened. They were closer to the road even than they were this time. So, they would have been easier for the DNR officers to walk than they did this time. They are putting an emphasis on not, people not cutting trees down and everything else out in the woods, because apparently there's been a lot of that going on for years up there, and they're starting to crack down on all these things. The idea is on the state land, leave it as pristine as you can. He told me I can cut anything like an inch diameter and smaller down, or like cut shooting lanes or whatever. Anything above that, you're not supposed to cut down. There's guys, he told me, cutting trees that were like a foot in diameter or bigger to make trails out into the public land to get to their baits. And that's more what they were cracking down on. But as long as they're walking in, their trail cameras is on their point of emphasis this year. So the Minnesota state statute, so it's not in the hunting regulation book, and it's not in the bear hunting regulation pamphlet they put out. It's just a Minnesota state statute that deals just with WMAs. It goes over like you can't drive on a WMA, you can't camp on a WMA, you can't leave stands overnight, which I already, you know, like deer stands, I already knew all those things. I just did not know trail cameras were part of all that. There's like 30 some parts to the statute, and I only just listed a couple of them off there, but those are kind of the common things that people know. I just didn't know it applied to trail cameras. If you guys want to look it up, it's Minnesota statute 6230.250. So 6230.250, and the part that applied to me was subpart 19, and just quoting, there's one line in the beginning part of that thing, that property may not be left unattended overnight. That's it. Property can't be left. There is an exemption for, in the bear hunting regulations, there actually is an exemption for the WMAs that I could leave a portable stand as long as it's within 100 yards of a registered and maintained bear bait. So basically, like now my bait isn't being maintained, so I can't have my stand in there. And then you can't hunt over bait for deer season, so it kind of, that little exemption keeps it so you can't use your bear stand to hunt deer out of later on, because you can't hunt over bait for deer, so you'd be breaking the law one way or the other there. So you can have a portable stand, you just can't have the trail camera. So luckily I got a citation. It cost me $137.50. It amounts to, I mean, I may be downplaying it, you can say what you want, but it amounts to a littering ticket is what it amounted to. So as soon as I got the citation, literally an hour later it was paid. I'm not going to fight it. I was in violation of the rules, so the DNR officer was very polite about it. He was more than willing to work with me on it. The fact that I was already on my way home when he called me, and that he let me leave him until the next weekend when I went back up to rebait, at least gave me some knowledge of what bears were in the area. So with that, I don't know really how to explain it that well to you, other than, to me, the pictures are part of the excitement of the hunt. That was part of, you know, half of what I was looking forward to doing this again, or to hunting again, is, you know, it's fun to see the pictures, see the bears. You know, whether you see any of them while you're hunting or not, that's a completely separate deal. It's just like running trail cameras for deer. You get pictures of all these bucks and you never see them, you know, when you're hunting. But that's part of the fun of it, is just seeing the bears, because, you know, it's not something I see on a day-to-day basis. Yeah, that part of it is kind of a bummer that I had to pull my cameras, and the fact that you can't have them in there. So I don't know how that's going to affect me bear hunting up there in the future. You can have them on private land, you can have them, you know, on, well, check the regulations, but on other state lands you can have them on the state forests and that type of stuff. It's just the WMAs, and it's because that one specific statute dealing only with WMAs that you can't have them in there. So I don't know how that's going to affect my hunts in the future. In that area, that is the only public land up there, is all state WMA land. So if I want to hunt on public land again up there, I just can't have cameras next time. It changes the expectations of the hunt a little bit. Next time, maybe a little more than this time, but it's, you go in to hunt a stand, you have no idea what's coming in there, and you're going to probably harvest the first bear that you're happy with. There could be a 600-pounder coming in there, and a 300-pounder comes in there. I'm going to shoot that 300-pounder every day if he comes in first. So that's how it changes the hunt for me next time. And I have to be happy with the bear that I shoot, and don't think about what could be or what if, all that. You know, that 600-pounder may never come in while you're there anyway. So not knowing that they're there is sort of a blessing and a curse, going both ways. I just enjoy seeing the trail cam pictures of the bears. Having 6 years ago, and even 10 years ago, having trail cameras and running them on video mode, it's actually very cool to watch them. You know, last time I had put logs like that, dug a hole and put logs over my bait, and those bears just throw them like they're nothing, you know, and that's fun to see. I'm not going to get that, so we'll get off of it. All right, guys, so I ended up with a couple more things since filming the original part of this video that I want to add in here for my lessons learned. So another lesson that I think is very important lesson in here is having your baits in thick areas. So bait number 2 was in a pretty wide open area. You know, when I got up in my stand and I hunted the first day, like I could see, you know, 75 yards or more around me, you know, in any direction, and probably see a little bit further in some directions. So I definitely, and that bait was the bait that got hit the least out of any of my baits. So bait 1 and bait 3, so bait 1 had, you know, the big chocolate in there and that bigger bear in there, and bait 3 where I harvested my bear, it was very thick in there. Bait 1, from like where my bait was to my stand, was probably some of the more open area in that whole area, but behind my bait to the south and to the east, it was super thick in there. And I think that my theory is that makes the bears comfortable being in there. They have seclusion as they're moving around through the bear or through the woods, even in the daylight. And I think that's important. And then obviously bait 3 that I shot my bear on, it's super thick in that whole block of woods around where I shot that bear. So I think that's a very important thing. Kind of goes into the next item that I had that I don't think I discussed that well, was pre-season baiting definitely, or pre-season scouting definitely paid off. So by that, I went up in July, beginning of July, and scouted a lot of the areas. Like, so where I had my baits, I had already been in there in July and basically figured out which trees I was going to hang my stand in. In a couple instances, I actually trimmed shooting lanes and whatever, you know, just clipped a few of the little brush and stuff so I could get shooting lanes in there. And I did all that stuff. So I wandered around the blocks of woods in July. So my scent, you know, by the time when I started baiting, that would all be dissipated and, you know, it would be kind of a non-issue for the bears. I didn't want to be doing that the same day that I started baiting, which is what I had done 6 years ago. So pre-scouting, going in and actually kind of finding the spot on the spot. So it isn't just like I want to bait in this block of woods. I literally want to be in this tree with my bait over in this direction, whatever, and had set my baits up or scouted my baits for a specific wind direction. So when I went in July, I had 7 bait sites set up or figured out. 4 of them were for southeast winds, 3 was for northwest winds. So after I was up there, that also kind of gave me an idea is, okay, then I kind of in my mind went through my head like, okay, which areas do I feel like are going to be the best for baiting out of those 7? And those were the ones I baited. But if one of my baits wouldn't again been hit, like bait number 2, I maybe should have moved that to one of the other sites that I already had pre-scouted. You know, pulled all the bait out of there, pulled my stand and all that, abandoned that bait, and then go start a different bait somewhere else. That maybe would have got hit a little bit better than where it was at. I didn't move that bait, partly because of the trail camera thing, because if I'd moved it, I would have had no intel on what bears were hitting it if it started getting hit. And then also, there's some sentimental value to that spot because I had shot my bear, my very first bear, in that same area 6 years before that. So, but yeah, pre-season scouting, you know, and again, I was up there a month and a week or so ahead of when baiting started and did my pre-season scouting and walked around in the woods. And I think that definitely paid off. So when I went to bait, I already had my spot figured out. I had it marked on my Onyx. So I literally basically just walked right in, dumped my bait, you know, put my sign, got everything legal for that stuff, and walked out of there and filmed some for you guys. That probably took longer than doing everything else in my bait. So it was definitely worth that. I also found when I was doing my preseason scouting, I think I mentioned it already, but there was areas that had been logged off since I was up there 6 years ago. Well, those aren't probably areas that I could or even would want to hunt because they had been logged. Well, had I not done my scouting and went up there to start baiting and I show up to some of those spots, I'd have been very disappointed and then probably scrambling a little bit to figure out, okay, this place ain't gonna be it. Where can I move to? So the scouting paid off. I do apologize a little bit. I'm annoyed at myself for this. So I should have, and I meant to bring my tripod in with me when I brought my game cart in to pick up my bear. On my way back out, once I had field dressed the bear and walked out back to my truck, or was on my way back to my truck, you know, with my hunting pack and my bow and all that stuff, and I decided I wasn't going to bring my tripod back in with me when I brought my game cart in there. And with my tripod, I was going to try and take some better pictures, you know, like with me and the bear, so you kind of see better scale of the bear. The couple pictures I have with my bear, and I'll pop them up here, those were pictures that I took with my phone just sitting on my little pack leaning up against a tree. So that's why the angle is so low, because my pack is only a foot high. Well, as I walked out the first time, I decided, oh, I'm not going to bring it in because then I got to try and carry it with my bear and all that stuff. Then I got to my truck and I took all my camo off and I left my pack there and all that stuff, left my bow. I decided while I was doing all that, that maybe I will carry it in there so I can get some, you know, some trophy shots with the animal that I got. I don't like calling it a trophy shot, but I don't have a better term for it. Well, I kind of got overexcited about getting back in there, so I got my game cart all reassembled because I had it, the wheels were off of it and it kind of folds all up. So I got it assembled, and by the time as soon as I got it assembled, I'm like, all right, let's go in there and get the bear out of there. And I was like halfway in there and then realized that I didn't grab my tripod. So on the way out, I decided I wasn't going to bring it. And then once I was at my truck, I'm like, I should bring it in there because I'd really like to get some better pictures. And then I was like halfway in there and realized I forgot my tripod at the truck. So yeah, I'm disappointed with myself there. I'm annoyed with myself. You know, who knows? I may never bear hunt again. I may never harvest a bear even of that size again. You know, so it's like, I'm mad at myself for not taking better pictures. So we'll go back to the rest of the lessons learned that I have. Having my bear baits further off the road definitely paid off. So last time I shot my bear, that my bait was somewhere between 125 and 150 yards off the road. It was in the same location I had bait number 2 this time, which was, I had the highest hopes going in because I knew there was bears in that area. You know, I had quite a lot of bears, may or may not have had a lot of bears on camera the last time I was up there. And several big bears come in there. What happened to me on that bait is I had a bunch of different bears coming in there, or some different bears coming in there. But as soon as you got close to hunting season, the amount of road traffic picked up dramatically. So my bears ended up going nocturnal on me because I don't think they wanted to come into my baits during the daytime. When I was actually setting on that stand, like if a car drove by, I mean, it literally sounded like they were like gonna run you over. It sounded like they were that close to you. So my bear that I ended up harvesting come in basically with like 15 minutes left of shooting light. So right at dark, and it had been quiet for maybe an hour or so before that. You know, no traffic had went by. So I made a point. Oh, so part of the reason why my baits were that close is because I didn't go up there ahead of time. I basically decided, you know, with a week ahead of that I was going to do all my own baiting and do it all on my own. So when I got up there to start baiting is when I was doing my scouting, and I just didn't want to go wandering around like an idiot through the woods and putting all that human scent, you know, trying to find a spot to bait. So basically I walked in, and, you know, like in that particular spot, you know, I walked in until I found the first nice tree I could hang a stand in, and that's where I put my bait. So this time, I tried to go further off the road on purpose. That was the whole point of me going up there in July and pre-scouting bait sites. Nice thing is I have them marked on OnX, so even the ones I didn't use this time, I could use, you know, next time I'm up there hunting. And I had a couple of sites that I drove by that I think would be perfect sites to bait. It'd just be a matter of walking in there and finding an actual tree to hang my stand in and setting it up. So I had like 2 or 3 more like kind of secondary sites that I didn't actually, you know, go in and scout, but I think would be good areas as well. So this time, oh, and last time I want to make a point of this too, because it's important. I may or may not have run trail cameras the last time I was up there, and I may or may not have gotten most of my pictures were nighttime pictures in there, and actually not even including during the hunting season, but in the whole time. So I wanted to get further off the road to get the bears more comfortable to come into my stand. So that's some of the research I had done. That was some of the things that I had learned. So this time, bait number 1 was my further south bait. It was the bait that had, you know, the chocolate bear in there, and then that one real big one. I figured it had at least 5 different bears in there. That bait was about 250 yards off the road, and that was my closest one to the road. I was comfortable doing that when I was in there and scouting that block of woods. I actually had went in a little bit further to the south, and I started going in there, and it was just so thick and such high stem count stuff in there that I had a hard time even just walking around in there. So I kind of, you know, was looking at my phone while I was in there, and I'm like, all right, we're gonna aim towards the north a little bit and just see what, if I can get into a little bit more open stuff, because the bear might be in the high stem count stuff, but you can't hunt them in there effectively with a bow. Let's put it that way. You can maybe do close quarter hunting with a rifle in there or something, but I needed to get, so I could get me a cleaner shooting lane, you know, of around 20 yards is my goal, but that didn't happen on all my baits. So I ended up kind of finding the area I was in. There was actually a raspberry patch right where I had my bait there, and I actually found a pile of fresh bear scat there. It was like a week old, I figured, from when I was in there in July. But then it was very thick to the east of that bait and very thick to the south of that bait. So, and I was coming in from the west side of it, so it was fairly easy to get into that bait. And then the bears were coming from the thick spot. That one also was on a road less traveled, and I'm being generous calling it a road. And it come in from the south and then made a 90-degree turn and run to the west, right where my bait was. So I basically walked into that block of woods right on the corner there, and my bait was to the east. So most of the time the traffic is going to be coming in and going away from my bait, or all the time, because that's the way the road goes. So that road was the road less traveled, because there was like almost no traffic there. I think the whole time for 3 weeks that I basically was running baits, I think only twice did it look like there was somebody else that drove down that road. So I wasn't afraid, and being 250 yards is different than 150 yards in my mind there as well. So the bears are definitely comfortable coming in there. As you guys see in my trail cam photos that I posted, that most of the pictures were daytime pictures. There was a few nighttime, but it was probably 90% daytime pictures. So that definitely paid off. Bait number 2, again, I only had about 150-ish yards off the road 6 years ago. This time I was 450 yards off the road. I didn't like my setup in there as well. The bears were coming in the daytime, but it was very open in there, way more open than it looked from the ground. Once I got up in the tree and hung my stand in there, I mean, I could see 50 yards all over, and some places maybe even close to 100 yards in there. I mean, maybe it would have set up for like a rifle setup if a guy wanted to do that, but and not probably had to trim all that much brush. So I think it might have been a little more open in there that I would like, but again, the bears that I had coming in there before I pulled my cameras, I mean, the 2 bears that were there were both there in the daytime. And then the third bait was roughly 400 yards off the road, but I wanted to make a point of this. So it was 400 yards from the road, but I wasn't walking in there 400 yards. So the neighbors right there had also told me that, you know, they run, because I talked to, there's some private land right there, basically right across from where I parked my pickup. And then at the end of the road, there's a cabin up there. So I talked to both of those groups of guys. They told me they run a lot of side-by-side, so I wanted to make sure that bait was far enough off the road that them driving and running the side-by-sides wasn't going to affect the bears coming in the daytime. So as you can see, my bear come in at 4 o'clock or just before 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I had him loaded by 6. Well, that bear had no problem coming in there in the daylight. So having it further off the road, I definitely think made a difference. And then also, like, bait 3 was on that road. There was a cabin at the end, and the cabin right across from where I parked. Basically, the only bears that, or people that drove by would have been the guy at the cabin at the end, other than the side-by-side. So the road less traveled, I think, definitely makes a difference when it comes to this as well. So next time I may look a little bit differently at my bait sites, where I'm picking to put them, drive on some of these roads less traveled to get into there, you know, with the idea that there's going to probably be less road traffic. All right, the rest of my lessons learned all have to deal with bait. So kind of, let's start right at the beginning. I probably should have rebaited every 4 days at a minimum. So the first weekend I baited Friday through Sunday. I made sure I had like 6 gallons or close to it of bait there. And then I went back up on Friday. Well, the officer let me keep my trail cameras there until that Friday, the second Friday of baiting, and I pulled them out. Well, what I seen is it looked like about Wednesday afternoon or Thursday morning, bait number 1 run out of bait. And that was the only one I really can base it off of, because bait number 2 didn't really get hit all that much. And bait number 3, they turned my camera so I couldn't see what was coming in. So Wednesday it was empty. Got Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 4 days. And I figured my bait was empty by the end of Wednesday. So I went up there and baited again Friday. So it would, you know, that bait was empty for a couple days there. I probably should have went up there Tuesday is what I figured. So you got Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, would have been 5 days. But then you got Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I would have been back up there and baiting again. So I definitely feel like I should have went back up there middle of that week, the second week, and rebaited. I even had thought about it. Part of it is I'm 180 miles away from where I was baiting, or from the town I stayed in, about 200 miles from where I was baiting. So 3-hour drive, it's not something I could have did after work. Even if I'd have left at noon, you know, I'd have been baiting at what, 4 in the afternoon, 3 in the afternoon, 3 to 5, and then I had to drive all the way back. So wasn't something I was interested in. So it probably would have had to take a full day off to go bait, and I definitely should have done that. With that in mind, I ended up with about 100 gallons of bait this time. So a 55-gallon drum of granola, and then all the candies and everything else I had. I probably should have started with at least 200 gallons, I figured, for one hunter. And I would have felt that would have taken a lot of stress off of me just doing that, because I should have probably been putting twice as much bait there. Maybe not to start my bait. I'm okay with dumping like the 6 gallons that I dumped there the first day, because I also didn't know if the bears were going to be there, right? So once it started getting hit, I should have been dumping more bait there each time. And then in those gaps from when I was there Sunday till Friday, I probably should have dumped 10 gallons of bait there instead of 6 gallons of bait, or more even, to get me through that week, to make sure I didn't run out of bait while I wasn't there. So basically right there, we're just talking like dumping 10 instead of 6. Well, now I'm doubling the amount of bait I dumped there. And keep in mind, I only had 25 gallons of bait left roughly, and I only hunted 2 days. So if I had to dump 5 more gallons there on Sunday, on Friday, you know, on every bait, that's 15 gallons of bait. I basically would have been out of bait by day 2 of the hunting season. Had I dumped the amount of bait I probably should have been dumping there. And then that's not including going back up there on Tuesday and rebaiting. So dumping more on Friday might have got me away from needing to rebait Tuesday, but I still probably should have went back up there anyway. So with that in mind, when the hunting season started, or when I went up there, you know, on the Friday before hunting season, baited Friday, Saturday, Sunday, baited Monday, and then started hunting Monday and hunted Tuesday. Even then, on bait number 3 that I harvested my bear off of, I dumped 4 gallons there the first day, didn't get hit. The next day it was empty. I only had brought 2 gallons in because it hadn't got hit the day before, dumped 2 gallons. When I come in the next day, so it had been Monday, I had 4 gallons again because I knew they had ate 4 gallons in one night and it was empty again. You know, they had cleaned out the 2 gallons from the day before. I dumped 4 gallons. On Tuesday when I hunted, I brought 2 in again and they had cleaned out the 4 gallons from the night before. So they legitimately were eating 4 gallons of bait a day in that stand, or could have ate that much had I been putting that much in there. And I was rationing my bait because even if I would have hunted towards the end of the season, running 3 baits, 25 gallons only gives you like 7 gallons of bait. And I had 5 more days to hunt. You know, so you put that math together, it only ends up being like 1.25 gallons-ish a day is all you could dump if I was rebaiting every one every day. And they were getting hit every day, right? So I would have run out of bait by the end of the season, so I was rationing how much I was putting where. Baits 1 and 2, I was only baiting every other day, you know, because the wind had switched and I knew I wasn't going to be hunting those for a few days. So, and with that, I should have been probably baiting like 5 gallons a day. And when I wasn't going to be there, you know, for a few days at least, I should have been probably dumping 10 gallons or more. So I thought about this, you know, how can I get more bait in there? I was carrying it in, so it might have been a matter of making 2 trips. So carrying 2 5-gallon pails in there, bait, and dumping it, coming back out, getting either more bait or carrying my pail with the liquids in there and walking back in and then baiting again, you know, so 1/4 mile in, come out, 1/4 mile in, come out, you know, at every bait. Well, you're talking probably an hour plus at each bait, maybe even more to do that. So I've been thinking, like, I do have a hiking pack for, like, if you're going to go hunt elk out west. I think I don't know if you get 10 gallons in there, and I don't know if I'd want to carry 10 gallons on my back, but carrying 7 or 8 gallons and then in that pack, and then carrying a 5-gallon pail of bait and a 5-gallon pail of the liquids, you know, that seems doable. So a guy could have got 10 plus gallons in there, especially like in the gap days. So when I baited Sunday and then when I went up back a Friday, you know, on Sunday a guy could have carried in a bunch of bait, and then on Friday I could have definitely filled my pack, and then, you know, the 5-gallon pail, so you'd have been dumping maybe in 12 or 13 gallons of bait there. That, you know, but with that in mind, so doing 12 or 13 gallons of bait for 3 baits, you're talking 40 gallons of bait, and that's just one baiting, you know, and you add that up 5 or 6 times, so now I'm at 200 gallons of bait already, and that's, you know, just getting me into the hunting season. So my thought is, you know, probably should, for one hunter, I'm thinking next time I'll have probably ready for 200 gallons of bait to make sure that I'm not running out. And to make sure, so the 5 gallons a day, I was dumping 4 gallons with the idea that, you know, that would be enough that when I showed up the next day, there'd be a little bit of bait left. Well, they were cleaning out 4 gallons. So 5 gallons a day might not even be enough, because my hope was that there would always be bait there. So when I showed up the next day, there'd be a little bit of remnants from the day before, and then I just dumped, you know, another pail load there. Well, that was not the case. When they hit my bait, they were cleaning me out every day. So 5 gallons might not even be enough, to be honest with you, for each baiting. So it might be 6 gallons or more. What I would hope, or what I was hoping to have, is some leftover bait there. You dump more bait there. I don't want to just keep adding and adding, so the pile would just keep getting bigger and bigger. Eventually, you know, my hope would be that it would slow down a little bit, or you'd have a big enough pile that one day you might only need to dump 3 gallons of bait instead of 5 gallons, you know, so they eat up some of the old stuff and get rid of it. So I don't know where that number is, But I'm thinking right now in my head, it's closer to 5 gallons than it is the 4 or 2 gallons that I was doing this time. Especially getting the bears there on my baits, the pre-baiting stuff is important, but having enough bait to keep them there during the hunting season so they're coming consistently during the hunting season is probably more important. And that's when I ended up having this kind of ration the amount of bait I had. The last thing I have here is don't add the syrup to my bait if I'm doing 5-gallon pails again. So the granola clusters and the licorice and candies that I had in there, the syrup I had, it didn't really absorb into the granola clusters as well as I had hoped. If I'd used the blueberry mix or blueberry liquid like I had planned, that might have soaked up a little better in the granola. But the syrup just kind of clumped it all together more than it did anything else, and it literally run through the whole 5-gallon pail. Even though I was mixing it into the granola, used a 5-gallon pail and kind of tossed it all around to get it kind of mixed all together, it still was running through the pail. Having them in the back of my truck when it's 80 degrees, I kind of wonder if the heat wasn't enough to like warm it up so it run better. And it was running all the way to the bottom, and then it was sticking my bait to the bottom of the pail. You know, so I ended up like at my bait sites using a stick and like scraping out the pail. Well, you're doing a lot of clunking, like clunk, 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 you know, trying to scrape the crud out of there. And right now I got pails at home that are literally got a whole crust of crud in the bottom of them that it's going to take me probably a whole evening after work to go through and rinse them all out. Probably fill them full of water and let them soak a little bit and then start scrubbing and getting them cleaned out, because I don't want to leave them a big sticky mess. So my thought is there, my lesson is maybe carry that bottle of syrup in there as a loose liquid, dump my bait, and then dump your syrup on top of it. So if it runs through, it's just running on the ground and they're gonna eat it kind of like they did the honey. I like the idea of the syrup. It just, what I did, it did not stick to my granola clusters all that well. And I'm not sure what you'd use, like even popcorn or nuts or anything else. I don't know that it's going to absorb it all that well. So it's just going to want to run through. So if I do it again, I probably wouldn't put the syrup in my pails with my bait. That's part of it too. I left 5 pails up there for the guys that let me use the shed. He's going to have some hunters come up after I was done. They were going to come up like the next day, honestly. And I left it for them because I can't keep the bait. I think once you dump the syrup in there, I think it eventually mold on you is the problem. So it's not like I could keep that bait, the granola by itself dry, the candies by itself. You could probably store those for 6 years and they would be fine to use. The liquor should get hard and whatever, but you could keep that. But as soon as I dump the syrup in, then I don't think it would store. So all right, I know there was a lot in there. This video ended up being way longer than I thought it was going to be, which is the typical Schmattz Outdoors video. I want to make a point, so please leave your comments down below if it's baiting, hunting, my bear, the hunt, anything I did. I'm open to any kind of comments you want. I encourage you to read through the comment section, so add your comments down there. I typically try to reply to them. Generally, my comments aren't just like, oh, great video. There are a few comments like that, and I'm glad to hear it. Honestly, I like to know that you guys like what I put out. But there are a lot of like comments where people put, you know, like use frying oil. Well, I actually respond to those comments, and I try to put in basically what I told you guys here, that I just didn't want to deal with the mess. But there's a lot of comments in my videos that there actually is a lot of good information down there that doesn't get into the video, something I might have missed or didn't even think about until somebody commented it. And sometimes there's pretty good chats back and forth between me and the commenters. So they're definitely worth reading through. I feel like a video like this is a perfect place to have those type of conversations. So there's probably could be, you know, some good information in the comment section as well. So I encourage you guys to read through them. If you don't want to add to the conversation, I'm perfectly fine with that. But like I said, there's probably some information down there for everyone as well. So leave your comments, read through the comments. I appreciate you guys watching Schmattz Outdoors.